Recently I've been talking about the JFK assassination and the amount of paperwork that's now being released by the Trump administration. We also had paperwork released by redacted in 2014 by President Obama. But this is a real moment in our human evolution where it was the biggest story of the 20th century, other than Man on the Moon. But hopefully, we can get to who assassinated JFK and possibly why. And I wanted to do a deeper dive for you. And by doing that, I've invited whom I believe to be one of the world's foremost experts and authors onto the theatre of the mind. Welcome, Mark,
Thank you, sir.
defense lawyer, writer of numerous books on JFK, Marilyn Monroe, and Dorothy Kilgannon, whom we'll get to during our talk, because she adds a real different perspective than the
Yes.
history we've been fed since the 60s. What are you making about all this new paperwork that's being allowed to be released by the Trump administration?
Well, let's look back just a little bit, if we can, Adrian. I'm a historian, so I'm always looking at what's important historically. This has been tried before, obviously, an investigation of JFK's death. Uh, Not right after he died, but pretty close. They formed the Warren Commission. And I've been able to show in my books that that was completely corrupted. The members that they picked were picked for only one reason, and that was because J. Edgar Hoover and Lyndon Baines Johnson, the new president, wanted to go down the Oswald alone theory and nothing else. The reason that that happened, by the way, is because J. Edgar Hoover did not want an investigation of anything else because of issues in his own private life. He was there were issues with his being gay. There were issues with his involvement with gambling and the underworld and all that. He didn't want that to happen. LBJ didn't want it to happen because of a lot of corruption with Billy Saul Estes and all of the money that was flowed into his campaign and everything. So if you go down the Oswald alone situation, you can avoid that. And the other reason is that Hoover realized that if it's a lone nut, as they called Lee Harvey Oswald, then there's no responsibility on the part of the FBI to have prevented JFK's assassination. However, if it's the Cubans or the Russians or the underworld or the industrial complex or whatever, then the FBI could be held responsible. So they went ahead and formed the Warren Commission, even though Congress wanted to investigate, the state of Texas wanted to investigate. He closed that off right away and shouted to the world, Oswald alone, Oswald alone. That's it. And that's all he wanted. And the second thing he did was he basically had his agents go to the hospital where JFK's body was and steal it. They stole it and they sent it to the East Coast. The autopsy on JFK should have been at Parkland Hospital, but they sent it to the East Coast to a military complex. And there's a forensic scientist, unfortunately, he died just last year, Dr. Cyril Weck, who I interviewed, who told me he conducted 60,000 autopsies in his life. That's the worst one he ever saw. There's some new knowledge of the bullets didn't match, the rifle didn't match, some other things didn't match, but one of the reasons they didn't match is because it was a bogus autopsy. Hoover did not want anything to come out of that would cause problems. So the Warren Commission then investigated, and I was able to find in my latest book, Fighting for Justice, a gentleman who was a legislative assistant to the Warren Commission named Morris Wolf, a very, very prestigious attorney, spent a lot of time trying to get the war hero Raoul Wallenberg, who had saved thousands and thousands of Jewish lives during the the issues with the Nazis and all of that, from prison, worked for Bobby Kennedy as an assistant, writing the Civil Rights Bill. And he then saw one of my interviews. It's mind-boggling that there are more than 15 million interviews of mine and presentations up on YouTube. I can't believe it. There's one done at the Dallas Library called the Allen Library down there, and it has 8 million views. He saw that, and he saw about Dorothy Kilgallen, and he wrote to me and said, I knew her. And I said, what? And so I interviewed him, and we'll get into Dorothy in a little bit. What he told me, though, was John Sherman Cooper, who was Senator John Sherman Cooper, was one of the members, and he was the legislative assistant, and he went down all of these issues that Cooper had. He wanted to resign. He was embarrassed to be on the commission. Lyndon Johnson doesn't care about the truth. Earl Warren doesn't care about the truth. They know about the connections between Jack Ruby and organized crime. They're not going to look into that. I mean, it was just basically a whitewash is what it was, and then they lied to the American public with the report. So that was the first one. The second was the House Select Committee on Assassinations, probably maybe 10 years later. That was a much better investigation. Robert Blakey, who is a good friend of mine and author, was the House counsel to them. And they really looked into the assassination in a much better way and all of the alternatives. And they came back with the conclusion that there was no question that a certain member of the mafia was involved, and that was Carlos Marcello. But they couldn't prove it. They didn't go far enough. There was then the church committee. A senator looked into it, other ones. And now we come to the time when people have been yelling and screaming, why don't we have all of the JFK assassination records? You have to realize that this doesn't go back to now. It goes back to Biden through Trump, through Obama, into the 80s to the Bushes. None of them would release all the documents. The most bizarre example of why came from Biden. He said, and I quoted him in one of my books, there are matters of national security in there that could affect what's going on today. Now, I hope your viewers will stop and think about that. What happened 60 years ago, everybody's dead. How could that happen? That was just an excuse. Another part of the cover-up, just like the Warren Commission. So finally, well, of course, the new president in his term never gave up the documents. But all at once, I hope this doesn't offend people, but the new president, who is a great entertainer, among other things, likes to make headlines. And so he decided, I'm gonna go ahead and release all these documents. They'll be redacted. You'll be, people will be able to go into the National Archives website and you can look at all of them. And what has happened, unfortunately, Adrian, doing so was a complete disaster. First of all, they didn't redact Social Security numbers. They didn't redact Social Security numbers, phone numbers for people who were involved in the assassinations investigation back in the 60s. One person that I know, Joseph DeGeneva, was the Attorney General of New York at the time, and I know about him because I wrote a book about the spy Jonathan Pollard, who spied for Israel, because DeGeneva is the one who prosecuted him and double-crossed him and so on and so forth with a life sentence, but he's suing the government. So first of all, that was a big problem. Okay, now I heard one of the members of this task force on the JFK, RFK, and MLB cases, say that the president is swearing that he will have his people go back into all of the documents, more than 80,000 pages of them, and do those redactions. That is absolutely impossible. That's just more grandstanding. So anyway, that was the first problem. The second one that really concerned me as I looked into those documents, and I read it, I didn't read all the pages, but I read most of them, was the fact that of all things, and you're going to hear me talk about what the hearing got into the other day. There were no releases of 2,400 FBI records that were never turned over for whatever reason. Of course, I know the reason. J. Edgar Hoover never wanted to the National Archives. And those are very important because I was able to get a look at some of those records. And in there, one of them, I'll just tell you right now, this is just shocking. One of them talks about that in the records, they looked into Carlos Marcello's prison time in I think the late 70s after RFK was killed, and it talked about his confession that he had confessed to one of his fellow inmates something. Oh, I won't offend your audience, but something to the effect, "Yeah, I had the son of a bitch killed. I'm really sorry I couldn't do it myself." That's in there. Well, that is just incredibly important information, especially as we'll talk about with Dorothy Kilgallen and her investigation. So that wasn't in there. And then, besides not besides not redacting a lot of the phone numbers and Social Security, they did redact an awful lot of the other information in there, especially about the CIA. When the president said, "Hey, American public in the world, there's going to be no redactions in there." Well, there are, and there were. You've got these big, huge lines across testimony with, black mark across there and everything like that. So basically, it's been a disaster in terms of what they've done. And so, unfortunately, we have that situation now, which clouds the effectiveness of some of the records that we should talk about.
Okay,
Get that?
we've had the original theory, lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald. We've had the single bullet theory. We've
Mhm.
had Hollywood films made about this.
Sure.
But it appears from what is being released now, that was all a lie.
Well, yes, and the government is very, very good at lying, whether it's this government or any of our other governments. Your government, unfortunately, that happens at times. That's why nobody trusts the government. But yes, there have been all these theories through the years. But what we hoped was that these records were going to, prevent some of that from happening. And we could look into, I don't think anybody with a right mind these days really believes that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. It's just absolutely impossible, as I've shown in my books. So you have to look at the other theories and everything. So they have these records come out, and yes, you're right. You're right about some of the things that have taken place. It's been more fiction than fact. Okay, but now we get to this task force that the president appointed to look into these deaths, and I was really excited that that was going to happen. The task force on the secrets, they call it, of the assassinations, is headed by a Florida legislative woman uh, named Anna Paulina Luna. She's a first-term congresswoman, no experience whatsoever as attorney or any investigations of this sort. The other members are just exactly the same. There's very little expertise there with regard to doing that. But loves the limelight too. She's a very pretty woman. She's in some ways best known for this. I think you'll be interested in this, Adrian, and you'll be impressed for her being on the cover of Sports Illustrated in a swimsuit. That's kind of her claim to fame. But I will say, at the hearing the other day, I was very impressed with her running the hearing because it was like a runaway train. First of all, they had three people there testifying. One was Jefferson Morley, who is an author and pretty much a CIA believer. I've had some questions about his authenticity and accuracy with what he's written. Second of all people, for God's sakes, was Oliver Stone, who is the creator and director of JFK, which was the first film, people will know, that really contested the Oswald alone situation, but he dived down some rabbit holes that made no sense whatsoever. So he was there. He's way up in age. Unfortunately, I think he embarrassed himself a little bit with what he said, but bless his heart. They had him on there because I think it might be an anniversary of when that first film came out, and to let him promote the JFK Revisited film or documentary. The third one was an investigator whose name is so difficult to pronounce that I'll screw it up, De Geneva, something like that,
Well done.
who's an author. I must say he's been critical of some of my research, and I respect that. I've certainly been critical of some of his research, and he hasn't respected that. But he was there. And then there was a guy from the records department at the National Archives trying to defend the fact that the administration went way too fast to release these documents before they could get the redactions in there. So those were the three they had. Basically, it was mostly all old news. The CIA dirty tricks, Oswald alone, and they showed, you'll get a kick out of this. They showed, or it's not so funny, I guess. They showed that basically the CIA investigation was like a wild goose chase. They had no idea what they were doing. There's a record in there that I saw that made me laugh. It was basically they sent 10 agents to Helsinki, Finland, and Oswald was supposedly there. And they looked into where he stayed, what kind of car he rented, and also how long it would have taken him to, honest to goodness, how long it would have taken him to drive that rental car to the airport when he left. Now that's investigation at its best. They were never really interested in being able to solve the JFK assassination and present the truth to anybody. So that was part of the testimony. One of the congresswomen got mixed up talking about Oliver Stone and Roger Stone, who was one of the president's confidants, and she was so embarrassed when that came out. They then got into members of the commission, the Republicans and the Democrats, getting into a war about who was the worst administration, the Biden administration or the new administration. And they got way off track with regard to that. It had no way of being able to do that. I had talked to Jefferson Morley before he was on the panel and asked him, I know this is going to happen. And I also hope you'll bring up Dorothy Kilgallen's investigation, which he never did. But it got out of hand. And first of all, they had, as they do in government, they had way too many people on this task force. So they stumbled over each other. What did we learn? Supposedly, Morley and others there did say that there is no evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald shot John F. Kennedy. That's pretty strong. There is no evidence that the bullets that were retrieved from JFK's body at Parkland Hospital matched the ones that were in the rifle that they found in the sixth floor depository. The sixth floor museum there, by the way, is a complete shrine to Oswald, and I would advise all of your viewers to never set foot in all the destroyers of history are there. But a big deal was that the bullets didn't match. But then this is what happens. The author there that I mentioned, De Geneva, said, well, the only problem was there was some bullets missing. And they never were, especially one, it was never ever retrieved. So they really can't say that they don't match. The rifle that was used by Oswald, they had many experts look at it, and it made no sense whatsoever. So, and this was the one that hit me. I hope I'm not going on too long with this, but
No.
this is the one that hit me. Oswald was supposedly on the sixth floor of the museum. We'll talk about Dorothy Kilgallen in a minute, but she actually did an experiment with a guy who said he was standing at the base of the book depository and looked up to the sixth floor where supposedly you could see Oswald, and you couldn't. But supposedly he's on the sixth floor. So then he runs down the steps, okay, to leave. There's no elevators. Runs down the steps, all that in 1963. And there are three women who are standing. One of them, I think, is on the third floor. The other two are maybe on the second or first floor. And lo and behold, they report they never saw him there. So there may be real conjecture about whether he was ever in the damn book depository. And Dorothy, I'm just going to give you this one more quick. We'll talk about Dorothy's columns in a little while. She wrote 10 or 12 columns because she was in, JFK was one of her best friends at her townhouse for parties. Really became good friends. Invited her, she and her son, Kerry, who was third grade, to the White House. Made a big fuss over his records. And so when JFK died, it was personal for her. And she immediately left for Dallas in Daley Plaza. And we'll talk about the other things with the only person to interview Ruby and all of that. But basically, with regard to the whole situation with Oswald, she never investigated him. She could never figure out any motive. Nobody's ever figured out a motive other than, he didn't like the guy, basically. But that's been a problem too. So the whole calamity there with regard to what happened, and she also did a column where she said, why did Oswald shoot the policeman, Tippit?
Yeah.
Because it made no sense whatsoever. He's trying to escape, and supposedly, without any words exchanged, he shoots the guy. That made no sense whatsoever. So all of this has been a subject of conjecture, and I don't like the C word, conspiracy. I use plot to kill the president. But there have been all these wild theories and all of this through the years. So did we learn very much from the first hearing here? No. There's some snippets of evidence that can be found. I will say this. I was disappointed that I wasn't asked to be at that hearing because I feel like I may know more about the JFK assassination than anybody who's ever lived, frankly, with all of my investigations, and Dorothy and also. Yes, I am going to pat myself on the back. 6 books. People can look them up on my website, markshawbooks.com. They can go to the YouTube on all that. They can make up their own mind whether I am that or I'm an imposter. But anyway, the whole situation with regard to this has been a disappointment. And I was told that they had considered me to be on there as an expert, but I wasn't chosen. So a gentleman who kind of acts named Ian Trottier, who's a well-known author over here and has a great podcast, offered to get in touch with Congresswoman Luna and talk to her about the evidence that I have. And lo and behold, on Tuesday before the hearing, I was able to speak with her and go over. I had sent her a 25-page letter that I copied to all of the members of the task force, informing them of all of my evidence, all of Dorothy's evidence, and all of that, and offering to provide, my evidence to that task force. So we had a conversation. It couldn't be too long because she had some other legislative duties. But she said, yes, I know about the letter, and we're certainly going to consider you for the next hearing, if there is one. If there is one. I can't believe they'll stop now, but who knows? And I will have my people get in touch with you. So I really appreciated that. My spokesman has kind of followed up on that with one of her assistants, and I'm hoping that will happen. Because it won't be me testifying there, although I'm going to be there. It will be Dorothy and her story. And she deserves the recognition for what she did to investigate the JFK assassination for 18 months. Because you know what? You know why she had it right, Adrian? Because they killed her. They poisoned her in 1965 before she could write the tell-all book for Random House.
Wow. A couple of quick questions, Mark. This task force and what we would know in the UK as an inquiry,
Sure.
is it predetermined? Sometimes we have inquiries that take years in this country. Is that similar in the States for this task force?
No, I don't believe it is. And all that you can hold Congresswoman Luna to, and as I said, I thought she handled herself really well at the hearing. She wanted to get the best evidence she could. She tried to calm down some of the other members, is that she has said, we are going to get the truth. In the past, I know, for instance, she said this out of the blue, which kind of bothered me in a previous statement. I know there were 2 shooters without any evidence whatsoever to prove that, but she said that. I think she is the intentions are very good here. it's been garbled because these records were such a mess. So I think they will need to get something done with those records and try to get those FBI records. And I would strongly urge the task force to do that. But she said basically, this is not going to be anything like a whitewash or whatever, which has happened in the past. I am going to get the truth. Now, how long will it take to do that? Or is that going to be of great importance? Because as you know, the splashed on the headlines today and probably in the next few months, who knows how long, is all of what our president has done with regard to tariffs for all the countries across the world.
Yes.
In fact, it's so interesting because I felt like that him doing that was very timely because there was the whole thing about Signal and these talks about matters of national security on a commonplace app. The blame on his administration for not doing what they said with the documents, the records, JFK, and another number of other matters that are going on with all the firings and everything else. And all at once, he decides this is the time to impose these tariffs on all of these countries. And that's a headline, you see. That's the headline now. So whether, I hope not, but whether my spokesman talked to her confidant this morning, and said, you know, what's going to happen here, and didn't really get too much of an answer because I don't know if she knows the answer. I mean, he could shut down this task force with one phone call. Whether he really wants the truth to come out or not, I don't know. You know, one quick thing. Your viewers maybe ask the questions the question is, why is this important, the whole JFK assassination? And what I tell them is this. What was the problem back in the 60s with regard to you had the deaths of Marilyn Monroe, which we'll talk about, JFK, Dorothy Kilgallen, Martin Luther King. I think there's another one in there too. Anyway, people didn't ask the right questions. They just took the government's version of what happened. And that's why there are these mysteries. That's why nobody really knows what the truth is about any of these deaths, unfortunately. It's just unfortunate. So what I say to them is, we learned from the mistakes back then. You have to ask questions about all of your government officials and everybody else for that matter. If we learned anything from what happened in the 60s, we learned that.
Gonna, I must qualify what we're talking about, Mark, because as an author of 31 books, six specifically about the subject matter that we're talking about today, JFK and Dorothy and Marilyn, you're not dealing with rumor and supposition. You, as an author and an investigator, you deal with primary sources.
I do, and that's one of the problems with journalism today. Dorothy was a woman of the truth. That's what her father told her when she started out. She was, just quickly, she was a college dropout. She didn't want to go to college. She wanted to be a reporter. She worked for the New York Journal American, where her father was a very famous reporter. She got really interested in crime and trials. The Dr. Sam Shepard case, which became the fugitive film, the Charles Lindbergh baby kidnapping case. She covered all of those. So she was always known for her honesty. She had the best sources because of that. Her newspaper column was syndicated to 200,000 people a day.
Wow.
She had a radio show listened to by 1 million people. And many people may remember her, who are up in age like me and you, I guess, that she was a star performer on What's My Line television show, which was on CBS for 1,000 years. In fact, people will get a kick out of it. If you want to, go to Prime Video. They've now put 80 episodes up there of What's My Line. But anyway, she was always known for her truth and her honesty. And she just forged ahead looking into the JFK assassination because she thought that was the right thing to do for her friend JFK. That's for sure.
This whole subject could get very confusing. So what I'd like to do is just leave Dorothy and her murder or assassination to one side. And let's go back to the beginning, because out of all the people that we've mentioned so far today, Marilyn Monroe died first, not JFK. And what have you discovered around what happened to Marilyn?
You know, I feel like I'm a good researcher, but I basically investigated Marilyn JFK and Marilyn JFK and Dorothy's deaths ass backwards. Because the first thing I did was publish the poison. No, the first book I published was Melvin Belli, King of the Courtroom, which was about Ruby's lawyer. I found out that he was. In fact, I had an advantage there. I must admit, I practiced law with Melvin Belli in the 1980s in San Francisco. I knew him
Wow.
very well. He took me to the Major League Baseball All-Star game in his Rolls Royce. There's a really a kudo for me. But what I found out about him, and I knew at the time, he had no morals, no loyalties, and he loved to be thought of as a member of the mob. He would hang out with those guys in Las Vegas, all of that kind of thing. Um, and you know, married 6 times, and he was a real character. And so when I learned about his connection to the mafia, I thought, okay, I'm going to go down that travel that road and look into, since he became Ruby's lawyer, how did that happen? And then how did he represent Jack Ruby? So the first thing I found out was that basically he had been hired by the mafia to represent Jack Ruby and to do 2 things. One, make him look crazy, and 2, not let him testify. Because you see, if you know anything about the mafia and the mafia hit, whatever happens, the hit men are usually hit themselves. They normally want to close all the buttonholes that way. So Oswald has supposedly shot the president. Now Ruby shoots Oswald to shut him up. Now you got to shut up Ruby. And so I looked into that, and that became the Poison Patriarch, because you can trace that back, the mafia influence, into the fact that in 1960, Joseph Kennedy, who wanted to be president of the United States more than anything, he became ambassador to Great Britain, you may know. But while he was ambassador, he cozied up to the wrong guy, Adolf Hitler.
Wow.
When he got back to the United States, his reputation was ruined. And so he said to himself, well, if I can't be president, and this is a true story because I have primary source witnesses, if I can't be president, I'll have my son Joseph Kennedy Jr., then JFK, then Bobby, and then Ted. 16 years of Kennedys in the White House. Joe Jr. died, so next up was JFK. But in 1960, they knew they were going to lose the election unless they won the elections in Illinois and West Virginia. So Joe Kennedy had a lot of mafia connections, and he called one of those mafiosos in Chicago, Sam Giancana, and made a deal with him and Marcello and a guy named Traficante and all of them. You help us win the election, and we will leave you alone in terms of any prosecutions for the near future and beyond. So they did help. So then we enter into the equation Robert Kennedy. And Robert Kennedy was what I call I think they called him the pick of the litter or something like that. He was always the one who didn't measure up to Joe Kennedy's aspirations. He got a law degree. He had never practiced law. And then I had an eyewitness who was right there, a guy named John Sigenthaler, who founded USA Today, at a breakfast when JFK forced Bobby Kennedy to become attorney general, because Joe Kennedy forced JFK to make sure that Bobby Kennedy was going to be attorney general. And Bobby Kennedy had written a book called The Enemy Within, where it talked about the sleek back hair of the mafia. He hated the mafia. And he and his brother had tried to prosecute them when they were in Congress. And so Bobby Kennedy wanted to go after these guys and make a name for himself. The first thing he did was to deport Carlos Marcello, a big-time New Orleans gangster, multi-million-dollar empire, prostitution, gaming, all these kind of things, to Central America. Tricked him into being sent there. Marcello gets back in the country. What's the thing? Nick Pileggi is not a name you probably know, but he wrote Casino and many other books about the mafia. He's a good friend of mine. And he said, you know, Mark, remember, the middle name for every Sicilian is revenge.
Wow.
And in fact, I've just got to, if you don't mind, tell you one quick story. I became a correspondent for Good Morning America. I did legal analysis. I was with them for 2 or 3 years, interviewed different kinds of people and things like that, celebrities and all that. But one time they sent me to Philadelphia to interview the lawyer for Angelo Bruno, who was the mafia kingpin in Philadelphia, about the mafia infiltration of Atlantic City. We were surprised that this guy would talk to me. But I got to his office, I sat there, and he spilled out all this information because those guys are supposed to keep their mouths shut.
Mhm.
So the producers called me the next morning and said, see if he'll talk to you again. I called his office, true story. And I said, this is Mark Shaw, Good Morning America. May I talk to whatever his name was? And it was silence. And then I said, are you there? And I heard this woman was crying. And I said, are you okay? And she said, well, I get chills when I say this. Well, Mr. Shaw, I guess you don't know. When my boss started his car this morning, it blew up and killed him. You cannot mess around with those guys.
No, no.
And I headed for the airport right away, that's for sure. So, you know, when Bobby Kennedy went ahead and double crossed, and that's been proven in all my books and others, the mafia, by going after Marcello, Marcello got back in the thing. And what's he thinking? Just look, again, use common sense here. He'd like to kill, he called the SOB Bobby Kennedy. But if he does that, then everybody in the White House and JFK, and they're going to come after him. But wait a minute. If I orchestrate the death of JFK, Bobby Kennedy will be powerless. And that's exactly what happened, Adrian. Bobby never, before he resigned, they never went after the mafia again. So Dorothy Kilgallen, during her investigation, we'll get into that, but she knew about what had happened back then. But in the Poison Patriot, I proved all of that to be true. So I was going to quit. That was enough. But Belli, when I was interviewing people here for his book, one of his guys that I knew that I practiced law with said, Mark, you need to know this. Right when Dorothy Kilgallen, and I didn't know who she was, died, Belli said, well, they've killed Dorothy. Now they'll go after Jack Ruby. And I'm just like you. When you hear something like that, you can't let that go. So I started looking into Dorothy Kilgallen, and I found out all this information about her that we can talk about. And it led me, of course, into the book, the bestseller, The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, then Collateral Damage, or then Denial of Justice, then Collateral Damage, and the current book. And so I've been able to, I think I've written more than 1 million pages,
Wow.
manuscript pages, about the assassinations. But what has happened is that, unfortunately, motive has been lost in all this, as it's going to happen today. And what I'm afraid of is this task force is going to make the same mistakes the Warren Commission made. And that would be disastrous for sure.
Who benefits bringing all of this out now?
Well, I think the president does. I think that this is a big feather in his cap. I think Luna and the task force could benefit. We've tried to tell, my spokesman has tried to tell Luna that, you know, you've got an opportunity here. Don't go back into all that stuff about Oswald and the CIA. You've got an eyewitness to history here, Dorothy Kilgallen, through me, that can make you a hero, because so many people want answers. And nobody at that hearing was able to say who shot JFK and why. And we have the information through Dorothy Kilgallen that can let you be good to your promise that you are going to bring this out, so that people can finally say, look, hey, we're not sure that Dorothy Kilgallen was completely right, or Mark Shaw is completely right, although they killed Dorothy Kilgallen because she had it right. But at least it's going to give them credible evidence that may close out all of these crazy conspiracies, or the fact that people don't believe the government can really go ahead and do everything they can to expose the truth.
It's 2025, so people expect things to be easy. Fast food, fast life, fast everything. Is there one piece of evidence that Dorothy Kilgallen had that's prime evidence to say who shot JFK?
Well, of course, I wish we had the files that would include what Jack Ruby told her. Just so you'll know, one of her first columns was the Oswald file must not close, and she went into all of that. And Johnson, you've got to bring all this out and everything. So she was trying to get them to expose the truth there. The second one was called Ruby Stars at Last, because unlike all of these other experts out there, including the ones that were just at the hearing, who weren't in Dallas, Dorothy was there. She interviewed witnesses. She interviewed Jess Curry, which I think this is one of part of the answer to your question. He was the Dallas police chief, Jesse Curry.
Mhm.
He told her that when he heard the shots, where did he send his police officers? The overpass in Daley Plaza, not the book propository. So that was a really big deal. Then she went to the Ruby trial, sat in the front row, and heard all of the testimony. She heard an account that Jack Ruby had said, "I will be there when Oswald's going to be transferred," which lit her mind up because he was saying he just happened by there. And then they had eye contact, and Ruby asked to meet her. And they were put together by Joe Tonahall, Ruby's co-counsel, and they shook hands. And he said, "You know, I love your shows on What's My Line. We show them at my Carousel bar. We show the programs there. So I know who you are and I have great respect for you." And so that was it. And then Tana Hill came back to her and said, Jack Ruby would like to talk to her. She's the only reporter out of 400 reporters who interviewed Jack Ruby. And I'm getting to the answer to your question. They talked for 8 or 10 minutes one time and a little bit less the other. Unfortunately, as I said, when she was poisoned in 1965, as we'll talk about, um, she was in trouble for that and everything. And then we should go back just quickly because I didn't really close the door on Marilyn Monroe, if I may, for a minute.
Sure.
Dorothy did not believe that Marilyn Monroe committed suicide. She had written a column on the very day that Marilyn was found, her body was found. Marilyn is on the upswing. She's going to Hollywood parties. She's going to marry somebody who's more important than John Kennedy. I mean, she had had a fling with John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy. She's got Broadway offers, all this. So Dorothy did not believe that she committed suicide. There was no investigation of that death, by the way. A police chief under the auspices of J. Edgar Hoover appointed three psychiatrists to look into her past, and they found out some things there. So they finally just decided, actually at 10 o'clock in the morning after she died, they said it was accidental. At 2 o'clock, she'd committed possible suicide. So that was another cover up there. So she had looked into all of that. So that's it's just unbelievably unfair. It's injustice to Marilyn Monroe. She never got a fair investigation, just as you'll hear JFK didn't, and Bobby didn't, and Dorothy didn't. Anyway, so she talks to Ruby, and whatever he tells her, she puts in her files. Unfortunately, we do not know what was in those files because they were stolen. What we do know is the first thing that she did. She didn't go to Chicago to look in Giancana. She didn't stay in Dallas to look into Lyndon Johnson. She didn't go to Washington, D.C. to look in the CIA. She went to New Orleans. And I have been able to prove that she was at the brother of Carlos Marcello's tavern, that she got her information there, and she came back to New York City and said, it's the guy from New Orleans. And if the wrong people knew what I know about the assassination, it would cost me my life. She told that to a confidant. I'm afraid for my life and my family, and I bought a gun. Somebody's going to kill me, and all of that. And then, it wasn't more than a few months. They found her, and let's just get through that. They found her in a bed she never slept in her townhouse on East 68th Street in New York City, wearing clothes that she never wore to bed, like she was going out on a date. Her makeup, eyelashes, all of these things still in place. There was a book on her lap, upside down. It was a staged death scene for sure. And I've been able to prove that there was no investigation whatsoever of her death. In my most recent book, which will be coming out this fall, murders of the first degree. It really talks about the fact that there was no investigation, and that the medical examiner's office, you talk about buttoning up an investigation or no investigation, the medical examiner's office, I've interviewed 3 people who are still alive that were there and told me that it was mafia controlled. It was mafia controlled. So you button it up that way, you see, so there's no investigation. So Dorothy was the real deal, and I think talking to Ruby, Jesse Curry, one more thing, Dorothy always looked at little clues, which I try to do in my investigations, and I'm sure you do when you're talking to your listeners and viewers and everything. She interviewed Don Ray Arthur, who was a police chief for Dallas. And what he told her was that he was responsible for Jack Ruby after he was arrested and was in the jail cell with him. And he said Ruby was all nervous and everything else, asked for a cigarette even though he didn't smoke and all that. But the moment that a Secret Service agent came back into the jail cell and said, Lee Harvey Oswald died, he's dead, Ruby relaxed because he knew he had done his job. Now, I'm just going to skip ahead one thing for a minute because I'd like to talk about Robert Kennedy for sure today because I've uncovered new evidence that will be in the new book about his death. Sirhan, who I believe was the same sort of patsy for Carlos Marcello being involved with Robert Kennedy's death, which I'd like to explain why I know that. When Sirhan was arrested, he was all flustered and everything else. But when he learned that Robert Kennedy was dead, he relaxed as well. So you see, they knew that the job had been done, although I don't believe that Sirhan had anything to do with Robert Kennedy's death. He just needed to know that Robert Kennedy was dead. So I think those are the most important points of Dorothy's investigation, and that's why I'm just hoping beyond hope that I'll be able to talk about these. They're in my books, of course, but it would be another thing to be able to testify.
A quick question about Dorothy. You talk about her columns. Which newspaper were these columns published in, and are they still available on these newspaper archives?
The New York Journal-American was a huge newspaper at that time. It was the New York Times, the New York World, I think, and the New York Journal-American. It was first the Evening Journal, then it became the Journal-American. And she was a reporter for them. I have to mention one other thing and let me make sure I go back to this. The other thing that Dorothy was able to discover, because she was given it by the Senator John Sherman Cooper that I mentioned before, who was on the Warren Commission. He gave her, because he trusted her so much, Jack Ruby's testimony before the Warren Commission. Secret information that was never to be released, and Dorothy released it in the Journal-American. It was a huge, big deal. J. Edgar Hoover sent 2 of his thugs to interrogate her, and I think this was her finest hour. Who are your sources? And she looked him right in the eye and said, I would rather die than reveal my sources. Wow. So that was another thing that she knew about that got her in trouble and led to her death. So, let's see, where were we? You ask about
the newspaper archive.
Okay, yeah, the newspaper. As far as these columns go, I'll tell you what I will do. I'm going to send you. Let me make sure. I think your viewers deserve this. The only place they can find them is in my books, and I don't want them to go out and do that. So I'm going to get it. I've got you. I think I've got your email. I'm going to send you the Luna letter.
Wow.
And in there are copies of those columns. And you can go ahead if you want to with your broadcast show them because they are so important with regard to what she was saying. And she was the only one doing that. Most all of the other reporters were going along the Oswald alone theory because back then everybody believed the FBI, you know, and so she was going against the stream of everyone doing that. So I'm going to send you that letter with the columns, and you can look at it. And if you want to quote from the letter, you're welcome to.
Wonderful,
It's up to you. But
wonderful.
let's give your viewers a look at those columns. And of course, I would love to. I'm going to say this now. I would love to hear from some of your viewers because I have gotten tips from around the world from people that have led me to just incredible evidence for sure. We have almost 5,000 email addresses now. And I answer every single email that I get. We have a newsletter we sent out as well, but I'll send that to you so you can see it because they really give a trail to what she was doing. And we really have tried to impress upon when I was talking to Congresswoman Luna, this is the trail you need here. Sure, look at all these other theories if you want to, but go down that trail in terms of what she had in those columns because those have never been released before except for in my books, and that's something that the American people needs to see.
Just a question about Congresswoman Luna. She talked two shooters. One of the theories that I've seen, and again, I defer to your primary sources rather than my
Sure.
conjecture. They
Okay.
reckoned it was a turkey shoot, so that there was numerous shooters in
Mhm.
place. It wasn't just one; it could have been up to six,
We don't know.
including the police officer on the grassy knoll. That
Yeah.
somebody somewhere has said that that was genuine. There was somebody there.
Yeah. We don't know. And there's a lot of conjecture out there in terms of what happened. I never looked into all of these things, I must admit, about the bullets, about the rifles, about all of these supposed people that were in Daley Plaza who could have been the shooters, because that is just not something we're ever going to be able to find because everybody is dead. I will share one thing with you that I think is important. Most of your viewers are never will never have heard the name James Tagg, Tague. Now, if you
No.
want to absolutely destroy this so-called silver bullet theory of one bullet and Oswald did all the shooting and everything else like that, which the a couple of members, including Senator John Sherman Cooper, did not believe was true. They asked for a dissent in the final report, saying they didn't. They were promised that. It wasn't in the final report, and they were very distressed about that. James Tagg. I never knew about this until a listener to one of my uh, uh, interviews and presentations on YouTube got in touch with me and said, "Do you know who James Tagg is?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I have no idea," which really embarrassed me. He was a car salesman in Dallas and walked down to Daley Plaza and stood on the curb as the motorcade was coming by a little bit away from him, but pretty much in front of him. And I put this in the new book, Murders in the First Degree, for coming out in the fall. Um, he told the Dallas Morning News that the first thing he did is he looked down at the curb and he saw a piece of the curb was missing. Didn't see the what the where the he heard the bullet hit, but he didn't see where it went. And then he went ahead and put his hand across his face, and there was blood. So basically, what he was saying is, and the bullet and the bullets fired did not come from the book depository. He believed it came from the overpass. Well, do you see how much that information, and I believe Dorothy knew about it and would have put it in her book, had meant to her? But just think about how important. Oh, by the way, it was in the Dallas Morning News, made no big headlines. There was finally the Warren Commission was asked to look into it. They had some of their staffers interview him, and it never became part of the Warren Commission report. See, it's things like that that they could never reveal. And I think it's the same thing today being repeated in some of these files that they're not giving out. They can't let some of this material, especially about the FBI, be revealed. So that's an important thing too. This James Tagg, who finally died, I wasn't able to interview him, but his accounts are very valid, very credible in terms of what happened there. But as far as the rifle and the book depository stuff and the bullets and all that kind of stuff, I'm no expert about those.
So Dealey Plaza, the narrative that we've been given for 60 years is lone gunman, lone gunman, lone gunman, lone shooter, if you wish. Why? Let me ask one question before I go on further. What's your take on the Warren Commission?
Well, it was so interesting because again, just the chance. I mean, I always had been suspect of what they'd done. Here's common sense. Okay, is a great. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. That's for sure. I'm from a small town in Indiana. Bad grades in high school. Took me 6 years to get through Purdue. I was a terrible student in law school, but I do have a lot of common sense, street smarts, and that's what Dorothy had. So you just have to think about some things. First thing that bothered me about the Warren Commission, and I have in fighting for justice, and I think in collateral damage, telephone conversations between LBJ and Hoover when they're picking the commission members. I mean, it is disturbing. All they want are members who will not in any way, shape, or form go away from the Oswald alone theory. And that's what they did. They make fun of Jerry Ford in the future president. Can't chew gum and think at the same time. He's perfect for us. Okay, and that was true. But you know who they appointed to the commission? Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles was the director of the CIA. During the time but the year before the Warren Commission was convened, JFK fired him. He fired him for screwing up the Bay of Pigs invasion. So why in the world is he a member of that commission? And then they had, they had people on that commission that just made no sense whatsoever. So I was always suspect. But these things happen to me. I'm not sure why. This evidence falls into my lap. And when Morris Wolf got in touch with me and was able to give me a firsthand account, I was writing as quickly as I possibly could, about what he told me with regard to the Warren Commission corruption and what was going on there, and they had no intent of ever people should have been able to trust the Warren Commission, and they wanted to, and they thought they did, and then they were just tricked into J. Edgar Hoover's conclusion that Oswald had acted alone. Disgraceful.
Is it true that there was future President Bush, the dad, was it George H. Bush? So the father of George W. was deputy at the CIA and was on the Warren Commission
No,
committee.
no, he was not. No,
Ooh.
no.
So can
None
you?
of neither Bush was on there. People can look up the names and so on and so forth of the people. Congressman Boggs, Congressman or Senator Richard Russell was on there. I'll tell you what I'd suggest people do. Go to the internet and look up the photograph. This is so interesting. Look at the photograph of the Warren Commission giving the final report to LBJ.
Right.
And you will be able to, the names will be there. None of them will be Bush. But you'll also see that Senator Richard Russell and Senator John Sherman Cooper were so ashamed of the fact that their dissent about not believing in the silver bullet theory was in there. On the one side, you will see Russell hiding behind Ale Boggs, and on the other side, you'll see Senator Richard Russell. And Wolf pointed this out to me. with a look of disgust on his face because he knew they had been betrayed.
Yeah.
Yeah. No Bush, though. No.
And the Warren Commission didn't sit for very long. I think it was convened November 63, so the same month that JFK was assassinated. And then the commission just sat until September the following year in 64.
I think that's right. I'm not sure, but I'm not sure if it went all the way to September 64th, but I think so. But Morris Wolf also told me this. Just think about this is the commission, and I hope this doesn't happen with the task force. The commission members very rarely interviewed the witnesses. They were very rarely at the session. Morris Wolf was there with Senator Cooper. But Senator Cooper was disgusted that a lot of times they didn't tell him that they had, for instance, they had Marina, I think her name's Marina Oswald, as a witness.
Yeah.
They didn't tell him that she was going to testify, so he missed that. Got it secondhand. Staffers with no real experience were the ones that interviewed most of the witnesses. And it just was a cover up. Hoover watching very carefully what was going on and so on and so forth that way. I hope that doesn't happen this time. We'll know because if they don't have another hearing, whether I am called to testify or not, if they don't have another hearing or even several of them, then this is just going to be another cover up like has happened in the past. I hope to hell that does not happen.
But that's why I asked the 2 points that I wanted to make. There's so much information out there. It's very difficult for anyone to cut through. I term it as the fog of war. It's very difficult to cut through that and get any clarity. And secondly, the narrative that's been promulgated for 60 years, it's very difficult to shake that off because it seems as if, well, as you said earlier, we believed back in the day, we believed the FBI.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think this is 2025. It's a very different place. It's a very different administration in the White House. Why would they block it?
Well, we don't won't know if they do. Okay. We'll only know if they don't have any more hearings and they are going to put it to bed, or they could have closed door hearings and do it that way. Uh, you're a very perceptive man, but we're not going to be able to know that. But what we can know, and I recommend my books to people. They let me know what they think of them and things like that. But I think I've come as close as anybody to really projecting uh, a truthful alternative to so much of the junk that's out there. Now, why didn't the Warren Commission want it to come out? Well, we know the motive there because J. Edgar Hoover doesn't want. The Church Committee did its best. The House Select Committee on Assassination did its best and everything. I think people are watching though, but you have to remember this. Uh, every once in a while, just to see what's going on, I'll be with a 20-year-old at a bar or something like that, and I'll say, "Hey, do you know who John Kennedy was?" They don't. You know who Lee Harvey Oswald was? No. Jack Ruby? No. Here's where they are today. This is in their face.
Yeah.
And they're playing games or they're, social media, whatever it may be. They are not interested in history. They're just not. So when you talk about an audience for this, I mean, I'd be interested to know. I doubt that they'll do it. What the ratings were for the hearings on Tuesday. I'll bet they're very, very, very low
But
because
surely that's what
people have.
the people in the shadows, let's call them the puppet masters. Surely that's what they want. They want to put the information out there, but they don't want anybody to see it.
Right. They
So they
just
can
want
say they've done
people
it.
if they're gonna listen or watch, what they really want to do is just, oh, that's Oliver Stone. I've
Yeah.
always been admiring of him. And then, if you watch his testimony, unfortunately, he's as old as I am. I just turned 80. He's he's trying to do his best, but he had some trouble with the questions and hearing things and stuff like that. But he was a war hero, by the way, in case people don't know. Bronze Star, Vietnam, all that. So I applaud those efforts for sure. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to provide much new information.
It's amazing that all of this has been consigned to history. The narrative that was given is the main narrative. Your book, Murders of the First Degree,
Yes.
you're saying it's out in the fall. Is there a release date or is it?
No, there's not. And let me explain to you what I'm going to do there. I'm going to connect for the first time the deaths of Marilyn Monroe, JFK, Dorothy Kilgallen, and Bobby Kennedy. 62, 63, 65, 68.
Yeah.
And here's how I can do that. I have recently, well, not recently, probably 6 months ago, through a watcher of one of my videos, discovered a man in Southern California who was at Santa Anita Racetrack. And he was able to give an account that was at the time unknown, but can be found. I'm going to be able to give a link to it on the internet, where he knew Sirhan Sirhan. Sirhan Sirhan came into the barn there at Santa Anita Racetrack and asked for a job. And this man said, well, we have only one job, hot walker. And that is where you would go ahead and help with the horses once they've been washed down after the races. But it only pays $200 a month. And according to this account, backed up by his son, who I have interviewed, Sirhan said, I'll take it. So for the next few months, quite a few months, that was his job. And so then he left. And just about, I think it was a week to 10 days before Robert Kennedy was killed, he and his wife, this guy, this source of mine, were at Hollywood Park, and they saw Sirhan. He was unemployed at the time, walking along with what he called two hoodlums, one on each side, mafia people, wearing a brand new suit and kind of pushing him along where he was going. And so this source knew about that. And when Sirhan's photograph was plastered on the front page of the Los Angeles Times, he went, wait a minute, I know that guy, because it said, do you know this guy? He called the Hollywood Park security people and said, I know him. He worked for me at Santa Anita Park, and somebody needs to talk to me. They were going to tell the police, and he expected to hear from somebody about that. He never did, because J. Edgar Hoover wanted no possibility that the mafia could have been involved in Robert Kennedy's death. What he did say, and his son confirmed, was for the next year, every time they would pick up the phone, they would hear a click, that the phone was being tapped.
Yeah.
Now, this leads into two things that I've proven. I haven't talked about this anywhere else. One is that when Sirhan was arrested, I don't know if people know this, he had four crisp $100 bills in his pocket. And police could never figure out where he got that money. Okay? It didn't make any sense whatsoever. Well, it doesn't take too much imagination to understand that he was as much a patsy for the person who had Robert Kennedy assassinated as Oswald was and everything. So finally, I was able to connect Marcello to Robert Kennedy's death based on motive. And what's the motive? Carlos Marcello hears that Robert Kennedy's running for president in 1978. He can't let Bobby Kennedy become president because he knows the first thing he will do is come after Marcello, because Bobby Kennedy has admitted, and I have admissions to some of his associates, that it was Marcello who set up JFK for the kill. He can't let Bobby Kennedy become president and destroy this empire and so on and so forth. So he has a colleague named Mickey Cohen, a Los Angeles gangster represented by Melvin Belli, and they go to Cohen, and Cohen roams the racetracks looking for people who have gambling debts, which Sirhan did, and all of that. And in my opinion, they recruit Sirhan to be at the Ambassador Hotel, which is controlled by Mickey Cohen, and be there. Now, I just noticed, and people can go ahead and look on the internet, Robert Kennedy Jr., who I have some questions about, but we won't get into that, has an interview on there where it talks about him naming the second shooter. And people may remember that Thomas Noguchi, who was the autopsy, did the autopsy for not only Robert Kennedy but also Marilyn Monroe, swore that he could not say that Sirhan shot Robert Kennedy because common sense, he was in front of Robert Kennedy when the shots all come from the back. And Robert Kennedy Jr. talks about this in this interview. He talks about who he believes is the second shooter, which I'm working on with more corroboration for the new book. But I'm going to be able to connect those four life and times and deaths, and that will be, hopefully my contributions to history in that area, because that kind of buttons up everything that happened with those four deaths in the 1960s, where again, there was not one good investigation of any of their deaths.
But I only have one final question for you.
Sure.
Who do you believe shot JFK?
Marcello's associates, thugs, whatever. I have evidence that he probably brought them in from Cuba. But you can't really pin down exactly who these people are. All you can pin down, and I think beyond a reasonable doubt, is that Carlos Marcello, based on motive, orchestrated the death of John F. Kennedy.
If anybody wants to know a little bit more about Mark's books, you can go to markshawbooks.com, I think, Mark.
Yes, that's it.
And you can contact Mark through that particular website. You can comment away under this video if you wish. But I just want to say thank you, Mark. It's been a fantastic conversation. And please allow us to connect again just before the book's released in the fall.
I'd be happy to, but I want to compliment you because obviously, when I do these interviews, I never know what's coming. And you obviously prepared yourself for this. You did your research and all of that, and that really means a lot to me because it allows me then to speak about things that are really important. So thank you so much, Adrian, and I hope we can be good friends no matter what, and I'll let you know when the new book comes out for sure.
Thank you,
All
Mark.
right.
Thank you for
Take care.
being on Theatre of the Mind, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
You're a good man. Thank you.